Welcome to Fermentality. I'm your host, Cat Pearce with Atlantic Brew Supply, and we're homebrewers talking homebrew and sharing fermentation. Welcome to this episode of Fermentality. This is Cat Pearce, and I'm sitting here with Cam Wilson from ABS Commercial. Cam and I are both getting married coming up here soon. Cam is getting married in 2024, and I'm getting married in October. So we wanted to chat specifically about preparing a homebrew for your wedding. Cam, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your homebrew experience?
Well, hi. Thank you for having me on. I've been brewing at home for about 10 years now. I kind of picked it up in college, as most people kind of do, and continuing along and tried to get a career going out of it, and kind of where it's brought me to today. Worked some homebrew for a very long time, went on to working commercial breweries, and now I found myself over here at ABS Commercial. I'm very happy with it.
Excellent. So my wedding is happening in late October, and getting ready for that in regards to like brewing some homebrew has been, well, a little bit stressful, to be completely honest.
Fair.
But I mean, planning a wedding is just stressful as a whole. And so, it sounds like you're also planning on putting some homebrew in your wedding as well.
Yeah, trying to. I mean, it's got a little extra time than you, so I have a little bit more time to plan it out, thankfully. But yeah, it's still another thing to worry about during the planning process of weddings as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully for me, like the people that are actually attending my wedding are pretty, big craft beer drinkers. So it's not really an issue of like finding like what people are going to like, but more specifically, okay, now I can be a little more specific as to what I want.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've got about 3 months until we get married, and thankfully, I did a couple of test batches, and so I feel pretty confident that the ones that I've got going right now are going to turn out pretty well. I also thankfully have a friend who works for Beer Law Center. His name is John Shemenkowitz. He's making me a sixtel of Helles, so I don't have to do the lager, which I'm super stoked about.
I was going to say, you better get going if you want any lagers.
Yeah. So actually that was, essentially the point of this podcast is to, first of all, share kind of some of the struggles and trial by fire of like what we're going through in regards to making this beer for a wedding, but also to share it with other people so that way they don't have to go through the same thing we are. So I, kind of have like a list of questions here. So I'll just jump right in.
Yeah.
So things to consider when planning a homebrew wedding. The biggest thing that I found that I needed to really focus on is like, does your venue allow for outside alcohol?
Yeah.
A lot of different, depending upon what state you're in, it'll determine what the ABC laws are and everything. But here in North Carolina, generally, like you either have to already have an ABC license on site, so that way you can have alcohol come in, and generally that would have to involve like, commercial beer. So really through an ABC license, you wouldn't be able to bring in homebrew. In addition to that, if you are an event venue and you don't always have alcohol on site, then generally you would get like a special event permit. And I think even then, and I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not John Shemenkowitz from the Beer Law Center, but, I'm pretty sure that would also need to be commercialized. So it's more specifically concerning taxes and whether or not the taxes are paid for.
That's what I'm kind of running into now, trying to find places. We're still trying to find a location, so we're been looking through a couple of states, and that's been one of the things that we keep running into, at least for North Carolina locations, is most of the liquor laws and the ABC laws that are here trying. It's like, well, can we bring it in? Generally not, is what I found. And that it's kind of the weird gray area at some places and others. So like some are like, no, we don't, but we'll serve it for you, but you just got to like buy your own, but then get the special license that you were saying.
Yeah, and it also depends on like bartenders too, So for example, with certain licenses, you have to have someone else serving it to you, more specifically so that way they are responsible if something happens, like somebody gets into an accident or a DUI or whatever. And that alone is like super stressful having to think about. So the way I went through it is I actually got a private space. It's actually it's a house. So we essentially got a privatized space so that way we can bring our own stuff and it's not a big deal. Oh, yeah. So with that being said, we're allowed to bring in our own alcohol and it can be self-serve. Now, of course, it's probably a good idea to have someone like write up a waiver of liability.
Yeah, probably.
But, ultimately, it's one of those situations where if you want homebrew at your wedding, you need to make sure that you're following the state guidelines. And like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just, saying what my experiences are with this and having to navigate that at least where we live and where we're going to be having the wedding. So in addition to that, like when you're trying to, once you've set down the venue and you've set down the date, that's when you can start like planning for what you want to do. So the biggest thing for me is, giving yourself enough time to be able to plan out and have a couple of test batches. So you determine what styles you want. And then once you've gotten to that point, you say, okay, let's develop a recipe, or let's go find a recipe that is, tried and true. Or even if you already have a recipe before that people are going to like, go with that, because then you don't have to worry about the test batch. But, it's essentially give yourself enough time so that we don't have to rush the beer.
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to come through in any homebrew, too, is just don't rush it, give it time. Beer's a flavor of love. So, I mean, keep it going like that, especially with lagers. Give yourself the time with the lagers. Let it sit for a minimum of the 4 weeks.
For sure. And I mean, especially in regards to lagers, you got to make sure you have enough time for a diacetyl rest. Yep. Even if you're not, going to be doing a diacetyl test, having the time for it to actually sit there, warm it up by a couple of degrees, let it sit there for, 48 to 72 hours and really let all of that just, leave the building,
Don't be at the bar.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want butter beer at my wedding. This isn't Harry Potter. Although I'm not saying that, having a Harry Potter themed wedding.
It's the same. All right. A little gray area there.
But yeah, I mean, also just give yourself enough time in knowing, if you're bottling, for example, maybe sprinkle a little bit more of a smidge of priming sugar in there just to ensure that it's highly carbonated enough and, giving it the time to bottle. Ultimately, it comes down to, like, how much beer do you really need for this wedding? Mm-hmm. And when thinking about the amount of beer that you need for the wedding, so it helps you determine whether or not you're going to go either bottle or keg. Yeah. And, obviously everyone's like, oh, well, screw bottling. Yeah. I'm going to keg.
So much easier to keg.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it also allows you a little bit of wiggle room in regards to the time. So, if you're kegging, sure, you could force carbonate it. I wouldn't recommend it. Mm-hmm. Give it the time to naturally carbonate, by adding the PSI at which you need it for, instead of just shaking the hell out of the keg.
Love a good rock going on.
Because, I mean, if you think about like force carbonating and shaking the keg, the reason I say, give it time to actually come up within the keg instead of shaking it, it's because when you shake it, that carbonation dies over time. Yeah. So, it's a one-day event, yeah. But with the amount of pouring that's going to be occurring throughout the day, you'll end up potentially with flatter beer than what you would want. So speaking of, figuring out how much beer do you need for the wedding, this was a point of contention for me. So I have a lot of people coming to this wedding that are part of the craft beer industry. Yep. I don't have the traditional, like, bridesmaids and then groomsmen. I have 3 bridesmen and 3 bridesmaids. And the 3 groomsmen are all part of the commercial craft brewing or craft beer industry.
I've seen a beer or two in their life.
Oh, yeah, just a few. I remember the first time I poured a beer. And so, you know, in addition to that, like I said, John Shemenkowitz is coming and, you know, he's like making a homebrew for me, which is really cool. But knowing that there are going to be a lot of craft beer lovers there, I know that I need to brew more.
Yeah, that's a big thing. For me, at least, I know on my end, it's probably going to be more of a split, kind of more of the normal mix. There is some craft beer lovers. Obviously, I am as well. But my side of the family is kind of more on the normal liquor side of the things. I know I can probably guesstimate a little bit less for myself, or like maybe a 6 stole, and then that's about it. And that should be more than enough.
Yeah, I mean, so for our side of the family, so my side of the family is definitely really big into beer. But, you know, I do have some folks that are more interested in wine. So I'm going to be so I have about 75 guests coming.
Okay.
And so the average like wedding guest like size or the amount of wedding guests that people have are between 75 and 150.
That feels like a lot to me. I mean, it's crazy. I think at most we're maxed out at probably about 70. So we're probably in that 50 to 70 range.
Yeah. I mean, the thing for me though is like I wasn't expecting as many people to be able to come, considering it's kind of like a destination wedding.
Yeah.
I mean, it's within 5 or 6 hours from where like a lot of the people live. But you know, as far as the drive is concerned, I mean, my godfather might be flying in, so he has. Oh, wow. Yeah, he owns his own plane and is like anyway,
a little bit easier then.
Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately, like where I'm getting married, like there are not a lot of like Ubers available, so he's considering driving his Mustang instead. Which
that sounds like a wonderful trip too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've got a Mustang.
Yeah. A little partial.
But anyway, putting us back on track. A 6 stool holds about 41 pints of beer. Right. And so knowing that a 6 stool of beer, which is like the size of a corny keg for homebrew, 5 gallons, you have about 41 pints of beer, but that's assuming people know how to pour a beer.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. And that's assuming you don't have any issues with foam or whatever.
Yeah.
So, for us, knowing that my guests that are coming are pretty beer centric, I think I'm bringing a full barrel of beer. So I'm doing 3 6 stoles and a half barrel.
Sounds like a fun time.
Yeah. I'm actually getting a half barrel from a local brewery in the area. And then I brewed a red Flanders ale because, like I said, we do have some craft beer drinkers. Is the whole thing going to get drank? No, but I want it there. It's my wedding, damn it.
Like, that's also the most important part.
Yeah.
You want.
Yeah, and it's my favorite style. So guess what? It's going to be there.
Like it or not.
Yeah. And then we're doing 2 other 6 stools of like obviously the Hellas. Mm-hmm. And then I'll probably do like an Oktoberfest because it's in October, of course, but I'm cheating on the Oktoberfest. So I'm not using a lager yeast. I know. My thing is I have said this multiple times on this podcast. I would be a terrible cellar woman. Like I'm fine on the brew day, and generally Alan helps clean behind me, so that's all good. But when it comes to actually like taking care of it afterwards, I don't want to do that diastole rest. I want it to be ready when I want it to be ready.
You got to check it the 2 weeks after and yeah.
Yeah. So so I've got essentially the recipe laid out and everything, and I'm brewing it this weekend. But I'm still trying to decide like what yeast I want to use. I know that if I'm using an ale yeast, mm-hmm. I want it to be as like clean as possible. So I'm probably just going to use like a USO5.
Yeah, I mean that's a tried and true. So that's always going to give you that clean. Or if you want to even go the kind of new route, the pseudo lagers, you have the Lutras that ferments incredibly clean. So
yeah, for sure. Don't get me wrong. I considered Kvike. So I mean it's interesting too. So I forgot. I'm also brewing a Belgian double with figs.
Ooh.
So, yeah, one of my bridesmen is coming over on the 26th, and we're going to be brewing a Belgian double with figs that he brought in from his farmhouse.
Awesome.
Dude, his fig tree is massive, and he is getting, at least a 3-gallon bucket filled with figs every 2 days.
Holy
Yeah, a lot of figs. Yeah, it's a lot of figs. So he's like, I don't know what to do with this. Let's brew a beer. If it's ready by the wedding, cool. If not, at least we have a cool beer.
Yeah, that sounds great either way. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like you said, you don't really have a lot of craft beer drinkers.
Yeah, unfortunately not. So I'll probably make something that I know that I like, or probably an IPA. Like, it's either going to be like a lager or at least a pseudo lager to make my life a little bit easier, and then like an IPA. And I know those are 2 safe options I can go with for it being
For sure.
drink at the wedding.
I mean, it's really important to have those, even though, yes, I'm bringing like a nice fig Belgian beer and a Flanders bread. It's one of those situations where you do have to make sure whatever you're brewing is going to be something that is enjoyable for the masses.
Mm-hmm.
So, always a light lager if you can make it, or, potentially a cream ale. I mean, cream ale is the lager of ales.
Yeah, I'm not partial to cream ales, but I agree what you're saying.
Yeah, and so, making sure that you make beer that is available for multiple people to have, that would enjoy it. That's important, even though we are like craft beer people, and we're like, oh no, man, I want this really thick imperial stout that's bourbon barrel aged.
The dessert now is what I want.
Yeah. I mean, then you also have to consider your brewing capacity, right? So for me, I brew on a 5-gallon system. I never anticipated and or anticipate to have anything larger than 5 gallons.
Yeah.
Because I have beer ADD, I mean, I actually do have ADHD, which might be the part of the problem. But, I get bored of the same beer over and over and over again. So I'm only ever going to brew 5 gallons at a time.
Yeah, I'm about the same. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no, it's fine.
No, I'm the same way. It's like, I'll get a 4-pack. I know, like, buying beers, like, commercially, it's like, I'll get a 4-pack. I know I'll go through it eventually. And then, like, I'll want something else. For sure. It's one of those hard things, like, at home brewing, I had the same thing. I only do 5 gallons. So whatever I make, I better like, because I'm going to have to stick to it. And then I get halfway through and I'm like, all right, I'm kind of done with this beer.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you have like 150 people at your wedding and you anticipate, these really big craft beer lovers who can probably have 6 beers at a wedding, then, a 5-gallon brewing capacity is not going to be helpful for you. So, at that point, that's when you have to think about, okay, let me, add some commercial beers to this. You're planning a wedding, right? Mm-hmm. So planning a wedding is stressful enough as is. You don't want to put yourself in a position to where, all of a sudden brewing becomes a job, because ultimately it is a hobby that it's a labor of love, right? Mm-hmm. Let's make sure the love is still there.
Exactly.
Can you feel the love tonight? But yeah, I mean, it's completely okay to supplement with commercial beer, because that's what I'm doing. Thankfully, I have another home brewer that's coming to my wedding that can make something for me too. So, we talked about, the amount that you can brew and the amount of people that you have and whether or not that looks like bottling or kegging. Mm-hmm. So, we were talking about bottling, how, maybe if you do have a smaller amount of people coming, and, bottling is a great way to, essentially, and well, how do I want to say it? Bottling is a great way to not have to bring as much equipment to the day of, right? And if you have less people that enjoy drinking beer and more like people that enjoy drinking wine, bottling is a great opportunity for that. I will say one of the things that I would do is I would take, just like as if you're entering a competition, take a bottle, put it in the same circumstance that you would with traveling with that beer over to somewhere else. So essentially take a bottle, take it out of, the refrigerator, see how it, essentially how it performs with the same circumstances that you're going to put it into taking it to the wedding.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, yeah, bottles are a little bit more, I guess you could say, set it and forget it type of deal. And I never thought about that. Yeah, see how it's going to perform going warm to cold to warm to cold, and
For sure.
so that's a great idea to think about and keep that in the back of your head for.
Absolutely. Especially if you're doing a test batch. I mean, that allows you to figure out, okay, is this style or this recipe really something that I think is going to keep well after putting it through the same circumstances that you're going to put it through taking it to the wedding. In regards to kegging is a great option that, it's way less work, preparing it and everything. But then you have to think about how are you going to serve it at the wedding? A great option for that would be jockey boxes. But then
All the fun pros and cons of jockey boxes.
Yeah, you really need to know how to operate a jockey box before you consider, doing it at the wedding on the day of. So, like, practice with the jockey box beforehand, for sure. Preferably on a keg that you're not taking to the wedding. And, if it's homebrew, whenever you go to get the jockey box, just understand most jockey boxes, when you rent them out, have the Sankey couplers on them. But if you're doing homebrew and it's in a ball lock keg, you need to make sure to have those ball lock connections. Thankfully, if you rent from a homebrew shop like Atlantic Brew Supply, we do have jockey boxes that already have those ball lock connections. So that is one of the, considerations that you have to think about. In addition to that, maybe you just want your own jockey box and you want to make one. What is the difference between like a coil on the inside of the jockey box versus a plate? So,
Plates are heavy.
Plates are super heavy. And, the thing about the benefit to plates is something where like you're pouring at a beer festival, right? It's meant for, short pours and, slower, what is the word I'm looking for? Like lower volume, right? So you're not pouring constantly. Whereas if you're pouring at a wedding, people are probably going to be pulling that tap handle pretty consistently. So I would definitely go for the coil, just because the coil is also going to keep it cooler a lot easier.
Yeah, I prefer the coil. It's just a little bit easier, and especially with the weight. If you're lugging a jockey box around, like a coil is going to make your life easier.
Yeah. For sure, it's also a lot more efficient in regards to just keeping things cool.
Yeah, throw some ice in there and a lot more surface area for it.
Yeah. So if you're building your own jockey box and you have the option, go with coil. In addition with the jockey box, you also have to know, okay, I'm going to need ice. I'm going to need buckets to put these kegs in, and I got to figure out how to keep the kegs cool on the way up there, all of that jazz. I mean, kegs generally, they'll be okay if they, get warm for a little while, but at least setting up the jockey box an hour or two before the wedding, the ceremony starts. So by the time the reception comes around, the kegs are cool.
Yeah, that's going to be an important thing. And CO2, we need to make sure you have CO2 for it as well, too, for the jockey boxes.
Yeah, for sure. I don't remember last time I looked this up, there was, and this is assuming that your regulator, it has everything set the way it's supposed to be. You don't have any leaks. But generally, I think like a 5-pound tank is good for at least a barrel of beer.
Yeah.
With that being said, I always have an extra tank for situations like this, just in case. After pouring it in festivals, knowing that, things go wrong, and that's okay, but you have to be prepared for it. So having all your wrenches, maybe having some extra like gaskets sitting around, like neoprene washers, and, just being prepared.
Yeah, knowing you have everything and having it set.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we talked about what styles you'll be bringing. So like I said, I typically would do like a light lager, an amber of sorts, an IPA, and then something fun. Yeah, you also think about the season in which you're having your wedding.
Yeah.
So what styles would be fun for the season? If it's hot outside, an American wheat would be great.
Yeah. You don't want a big old stout in the middle of July.
No. Like I said, I want the thickest
Yeah.
imperial stout that I can get that's bourbon barrel aged and is, aged on top of cherries.
Exactly. 12%, 13%.
I mean, and that's another thing you have to consider too, what is the vibe of your wedding, right? So if you are having more of a chill wedding where it's meant to, you're trying not to get people absolutely plastered.
Yeah.
Then maybe consider not having super high ABV.
Probably a smart idea.
Yeah. But if you are, let's say towards the end of the wedding, right? And most people have left and, you always have your stragglers and there's a bonfire. Yeah. Okay. Maybe then we should have a barley wine.
Yeah.
But don't tell people the barley wine is there until the end.
Yeah. Just make it a nice little nightcap for the evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you got some cigars. Yeah. So at least that's what I plan on doing for my wedding. So the house that we're having it at, we have 2 fire pits and it's up in the mountains. So it's going to be nice and cool at the end of October. We're definitely, and I mean, here's the thing. I'm not brewing a barley wine. Sorry.
No.
I'm going to get a commercial example of that. Probably get, about 4 or 5 bombers and then have it available for people who want it. And then some nice cigars to pair with it because your girl wants a cigar on her wedding day.
I mean, why not?
Yeah. So, I mean, also considering what time of the year, you got to think about keeping things cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that is where like maybe the benefit of bottles would come around. So, jockey boxes when you're pouring, especially if you do have like a plate, with those plates, on top of the plates, you generally have just like that silicone tubing, or not nylon, silicone and
Vinyl.
Thank you. That tubing isn't going to stay as cool as a coil.
Yeah.
And if it's in the middle of the summer, there is a chance that you're going to have some foamy beer, especially if you have like a Hefeweizen on top. Something with a lot of protein, maybe consider that with your styles too.
Yeah.
Hey, if it's warmer, I know I said an American wheat beer sounded like a great idea, but in the summertime with all of that protein, it's not going to be the
Play it as safe as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, maybe that's a point where you say, okay, I have enough coolers to be able to just pack a cooler with each style of beer that I want to have, or, 3 coolers that are like intermixed and, a Yeti can keep things pretty cold. But, a tub with a keg and open to the air with the ice and everything, that ice is going to melt.
Yeah, you got a couple hours at most, maybe.
Yeah. Also, if it's during the winter, one of the things you have to consider with jockey boxes is making sure that by the time you get there and you put it on ice, make sure all of the sanitizer is emptied out of the lines inside of the jockey box. Because it can freeze inside of the jockey box, especially after you put ice in there.
Yeah, I never thought about that. I mean, coming from Florida most of my life, ice is not a problem at any point of my year.
I've had this happen even in the summertime where we didn't realize it was bad. We had to take all of the ice outside of the inside of the jockey box and essentially like warm it up in the sun. So that way we could pour all of the sanitizer out before. Yeah, it was bad. But that's a consideration that you have to think about. Now, of course, like if it's, super freezing outside, hopefully you would maybe like have an indoor wedding.
Yeah, whole bellies.
Or if there are some outdoors, like make sure the beer is being poured inside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind when you're planning to have homebrew at a wedding and your homebrew specifically. One of the things that I was reading actually on the AHA website, they actually did have an article about preparing for a homebrew wedding. In addition to, having these test batches, if there's a competition in your local area while you're doing those test batches, send them in or at least get a BJCP certified judge or certified cicerone or somebody with a good palate to give you some feedback. Because if you're making beers that are, averaging about 20 points, the last thing you want is for people to get there and be like, this beer is not really my favorite. It's not the greatest. And then your feelings are hurt, I mean, if you have experience in homebrewing, and I hate to put this out there, But if you have experience in home brewing and you've been home brewing for a hot minute, you're probably fine. But if you're just starting out, I would recommend don't stress about it. Just go ahead and get the commercial beers. But, get feedback on the beer that you're making before you serve it to your guests. You want to make sure that people are going to enjoy it. It's going to get drank and you're not bringing a bunch of stuff home.
Yeah, also at the end of the day is if everybody's happy. If you're happy, they're happy. Then if it's commercial or homebrew, that's all that matters.
For sure, for sure. Do you have anything else that you can think about that would be a good piece of advice for folks looking into homebrewing for the wedding?
Always a good question. I know we've been talking a lot about like what other people are going to like, what and all the longs of that. It's kind of along with everything else in the wedding. It's also your wedding. So like, what do you want most? And then go from there. If people are happy with it, then go for it. But it's what makes you happy, I think, is always kind of the overarching theme of the entire episode. And weddings in general is if it makes you happy and makes your significant other happy, then go with that.
For sure, for sure. That's just a good piece of advice for everything in regards to planning a wedding. Yeah. This is your day. Try not to let the bastards get you down. Yeah, I know for sure. Like I had a friend who was planning a wedding, and there were so many like small little things that just kept coming up, and she was so focused on making everyone else happy. And I had to like sit her down and be like, listen, you got to do what makes you happy. This is your day. At the end of the day, you're also the one spending all the money on it.
Yeah.
So spend the money on the things that you want to do. I thought about like making my own wine for the wedding because we have some like pretty good wine kits in the shop. But then I looked back at it and I was like, you know what? It's just going to be so much easier if I just buy it somewhere else. Like I'm looking at where my money is going, where my time is going, and, ensuring that I'm spending it wisely. Mm-hmm. I would say that first and foremost, just going to reiterate this. I know I already mentioned it. It was the first thing we talked about. Make sure you're doing it legally.
Yeah.
That you don't want to get in trouble when it's your wedding day. You don't want that to be the one thing that you remember about your wedding day. There's already going to be so much going on, just really focus on ensuring that once you choose that venue, that it is okay for you to bring in homebrew and or choose your venue based on the fact that you want to homebrew.
Yeah.
There's nothing more exciting about being able to share your labor of love with other people during a day that is already meant to bring you so much joy. But in the end, like focus on the things that you need to focus on.
Yeah.
Which is each other. So awesome. Well, I think we pretty much covered everything that I wanted to do. It's kind of a short episode, but I figured since we are both getting married and we're both doing the same idea of home brewing for a wedding, that this would be a perfect opportunity to sit down and chat about it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was great. And yeah, this hits pretty much most of the points that people are going to be thinking about. So.
Yeah. And if any of you guys who are listening have any questions for us in regards to planning for a homebrew wedding, feel free to reach out to us. I think the marketing team will probably put out an email, but you can always email me at info@atlanticbrewsupply.com. All right. Thanks, y'all, for listening, and good luck on your planning for your homebrew wedding.
Thank you. Bye.